Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Husseini Ahmed, and I'm the director of this program and a number of other programs. And I'm just here to welcome you and let you know that we have a virtual audience that I hope we'll be able to bring into the conversation at the end. So if you have any questions, please just type them into the chat, and we've got somebody monitoring it. And at the end of the talk, we'll be able to address those questions. Now I'm going to leave you with Bob, who's the instructor for this course, to introduce the guest speaker. Thank you.
So I guess first is, which is quite customary here, is that we desire to acknowledge that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. So let me tell you a little bit about Konrad von Finkenstein, and I'll come back to one item as to why he's here as a connection from many years past. So Konrad von Finkenstein, our speaker today, who is the Ethics and Conflict of Interest Commissioner of Canada. He's had a successful, varied, and multifaceted public service career with the Government of Canada, serving as a legal advisor, judge, and head of two of Canada's most prominent federal tribunals. Born in Germany and immigrating as a teenager to Canada, he received a Bachelor of Arts with honors from Carleton University and a Bachelor of Laws from Queen's University. He joined the public service in 1973 as a legal advisor to the Federal Department of Justice, and later with Industry Canada and External Affairs, now Global Affairs. He moved on to become the senior legal advisor to Simon Reisman for the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, and he particularly specialized in the dispute settlement mechanism negotiated under that agreement. And he went on, I believe, to two other agreements, both the NAFTA and the USMCA, I guess is the official title of it. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Since that time, he has been the CEO of the Canadian Competition Bureau, guiding it through significant investigations, including the proposed merger of four of Canada's largest banks and the merger of Air Canada and Canadian Pacific Airlines. He later served a 4-year term as a justice of the Federal Court of Canada, and then went on to head the Canadian Radio and Television Commission. Prior to his appointment to a 7-year term as Ethics and Conflict of Interest Commissioner, on March 5th, 2024, he works as a trade consultant and commercial arbitrator. So I'll go back a little bit in history. I won't give the exact date because I think that would date us both in terms of age. But in 1988, Konrad was the chief legal counsel to Simon Reisman, who was the chief negotiator on the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement. At that time, I was with the province of Nova Scotia, was doing trade policy work, and I was one of, I guess, 3 advisors, 2 public servants and one consultant to the province on the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement in terms of issues that would affect the province of Nova Scotia. Specifically, probably predominantly were the issues of supply management, which is being debated even now, and as well the regional development programs that Nova Scotia had, which were quite crucial to providing support to business in industry and in agriculture and fisheries. So at that time, when the agreement was negotiated, I can recall, because I had witnessed his performances at the committee that Chief Negotiator Simon Reisman had with all the provinces. We'd meet probably once a month, but I had never met and talked formally with him. But when the agreement was negotiated, when it was concluded, I'm going to say within a day or two after, he came and spoke to all the provincial representatives who were representing their provinces in terms of their own interests. And I recall kind of debating across the table with him. He was chief counsel, and I was not that far removed from law school at that point. And on the dispute settlement mechanism, which if there were debates about one country or the other putting illegal or tariffs in place that would be out of place with what the regime would be under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, as the WTO was called, and also in terms of regional development programs or assistance programs to particular industries as to whether they met the international test which was applied to the agreement. And we were talking about this at lunch. It was a long debate about achieving what was the key provision in the dispute settlement mechanism between Canada and the United States on trade issues. and that was remand. So there would be panels, the two parties that agreed to, two on each side and one chosen by the panel itself. And remand, they go through whether it was illegal under the agreement or under the general agreement on tariffs and trade, and they make a recommendation which would be taken back to the country. That's what remand meant. And I said across the table to Konrad, I don't think that's going to work, because knowing the Americans, since I grew up in the United States, they're going to look upon this as an ability to just slough off Canada's views on things with the United States would try to prosecute. And there were a number of cases, particularly prominent, of course, was near, and we talked about this at lunch, with softwood lumber, which really has never really been settled over the last numerous years.
I'm sorry, please speak a little louder for the folks online.
Too loud?
Can you speak a little louder?
Sorry.
You could, please?
Yeah. So I was wrong. Although he didn't make me completely wrong when we talked at lunch. It has worked pretty well, but it's not worked completely in all cases. And it was at that point when I went on to see if the ethics and conflict of interest commissioner would come and speak. Well, and behold, I look at a photo and I said, I know that man. And we conversed back and forth online, and he agreed to come down, which we're very grateful for, and view both his career and his judgment. And he's going to speak about what his office does, but we're going to challenge him, I think, as well, about, because the course Ethics in Action is about ethical decision making and ethical principles and how that is applied. And as I mentioned to him, we have students here from 6 different countries under the leadership diploma program, and all having ethical decision making, ethical decision to make as they go on and as they immigrated to Canada. I look forward to seeing them in our industries across the country, because their backgrounds are quite varied. And I'm really proud of where they've come so far in the class. And I'm hoping that they'll show how far they've come by some of the questions they'd asked to Konrad. So Konrad von Finkenstein.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you. Basically, what I thought I'd run you through very quickly. So what my office does, how it works, what are the principles we implement, and how it fits in the whole overall ethical scheme of Canada. And then I'll barely make it interactive and answer your questions. Now, what are ethics?
Let's say for the computer server, I can mount the PowerPoint slide.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Now, can you see me? Where do I? Can you see me? I see my. Okay, there. Okay. What are ethics? I think the best definition that I found is ethics are really the standards that guide our behavior, both in terms of individuals and as members of an organization. And what are they based on? They are based on our values. Ethics reflect our values. It's as simple as that. Let's not talk anything more about morals, beliefs, or anything. It's the general values that we have, and now we in Canada, of course, are the democracy, and therefore our values are that we expect integrity from our government. We expect them to make decisions that are honest in the best interest of all. That's really best. And how do we enforce that? How do we do this? Now, really, the government of Canada has 5 pillars, or 6 if you want to count the elections, but that's been, I think the 5 the key ones is we have a code of conduct for the lobbyists. That's for people who act with government, how they have to behave. Then we have a value and ethics code for the public service, which tells, in effect, public servants what they may do or may not do, etc., and how do they interact with the public. Then we have, for the decision makers and for elected officials, we have the conflict of interest code for members of the House of Commons, and we have the ethics of conflict of interest code for senators, and we have something called the Conflict of Interest Act, which applies to senior officials, like myself, for instance. We all have to, and I'll go into them. Then we have the Auditor General, which looks at the government and what it does, and whether it uses its money properly. And then we have a criminal code, which of course deals with people who violate ethics by corruption, whatever. Now, the lobbyist code, the first is to reintroduce transparent and ethical conduct. We want to make sure that we know who talked to our decision maker and what they talked about. And there's a big code of done by the for lobbyists, where they have to register, where they have to let them know who they talk to and how often. And there's a commissioner of lobbyists who enforces that code of conduct, who verifies what they do, and if there are breaches, then she can report. She reports those breaches. Then we have the value and ethics code for the public service. Again, it basically tells them what's right or wrong to do in the public service, establishes a regime of accountability, and it also provides for whistleblowing and protection for whistleblowers. This is enforced by somebody called the Public Service Integrity Commissioner, who investigates and recommends appropriate actions. She doesn't enforce it, but she tells the deputy minister in your section there that this has happened. We should fix it. Then is what I'm in charge of, which is the Conflict of Interest Act and the code for members of the House of Commons. Basically, what is the way we look at it is everybody who's in public service, if it's any good, comes from private practice, was successful in the public service, gets elected and then leaves. So by definition, you have conflict. You can't have a conflict and not be successful. And then so our job is to help them manage it, identify them, make sure that they take the appropriate action, get rid of the conflict, etc., and tell them in the future, give them advice on what to do to avoid it. And once in a while, we do an investigation, and I'll come to that in a second. But the real purpose is to manage and avoid the conflict. Now, the Auditor General, her job is to look at absolutely everything in a department and make sure that the public money is spent properly, that we get value for money, that there's a program, these are objectives, the public money was spent for, and these were the results. And of course, she's a lot. You've all heard about reports from her. They've always been of misuse. A perfect example is this ArriveCan website, which was supposed to cost $50,000 and wound up costing $50 million. I mean, something was wrong. There's absolutely no question about it. And she's gone to town to it, and there are now criminal investigations, everything. But that's at the extreme. The more important, the most programs are constructed properly, enforced properly, and but how is it enforced? She exposes it. She doesn't prosecute anything that's left to us. And finally, there's a criminal code, which of course provides specific provisions against corruption, bribery, fraud, misrepresentation, breach of trust, etc., defines them, etc. And then if there's something, then the enforcement agencies get enforced and they investigate, and then the counter attorneys and DPT prosecutes. What you'll see on all of those, the one characteristic is transparency and exposure. If there is misbehavior, it has to be moved on. And you're really dealing with people's reputation. And therefore, you want them to behave properly and ethically. And if they're not, you expose it and you publicize that money. And the penalty is publication, because essentially the reputation is ruined. If I make a report and say this lady here, they did this and this, and that was wrong, etc., etc., well, who's going to employ her? Who, if she's going to see a consultant, who's going to hire her, etc. If she's elected, most likely she won't get re-elected, etc. Her reputation is changed. Okay? And all the same thing with lobbyists, same thing with public service. The whole ethical regime in Canada is based on, first of all, rules reflecting our values, which have to be followed, somebody in charge of monitoring it, etc. And lastly, and helping manage it, and if there's a misdoing, that it gets exposed. Okay. Now let me give you a little bit more of what I do. As I say, I'm an officer of the House of Commons. All of the commissioners are appointed by Parliament, by government, but report to Parliament, need parliamentary approval. They have to be people who have no partisan attachment. They usually get a 5 or 7 year terms. In my term, case, it's 7 years. I report directly to Parliament, to the Speaker of the House, which also has the independence that I don't have to worry about money or people, etc. I can basically, whatever I say I need as a judge, they give me, because if they would cut it back, I could scream and say, hey, you're not interested in ethical investigations, and you're not giving me the means. So essentially, that's never been an issue. When we ask for whatever we need, we get it. Now, how big is our clientele? Under the Conflict of Interest Act, you see we have 11% are ministers and parliamentary secretaries, 78% are the members of the House of Commons. And on the public office side, there are two categories. Public office holders, these are people who have part-time employees. They have to comply with the act. We give them, when they get appointed, we give them a copy and say, yeah, you have to comply with the act, but basically that's it. And there's another category, which are the senior public officers. They are called reporting public officers or holders. And those are 20% are public government and council appointed, 2% are ministers, and 20% are ministerial staff. So what it really boils down to is these people, the reporting public office holders regime applies to the elected ministers, the parliamentary staff, and senior public servants. And on top of it, there's a conflict of interest code that applies to all members of it. On total, this is about 3,500 people that we look after. Now, if the conflict of interest code for the members provides that they have to avoid real and apparent conflict of interest, they have to disclose to us at the beginning when they are being appointed what are their assets, what are the connections, etc. And we tell them what they can do and can't do, what they have to get rid of or put in a public in a blind trust, or if it's a membership, you have to discontinue it, etc. And it applies to them and their families. And we put a redacted version of what they say on our website. So you can go there and you say, my member of parliament, what does he or she do, what are their connections, etc. And we do this right at the beginning. We have 60 days after election to file this with us. It gets annually updated, and if there's a major change, report to us. Now, because this is a pretty heavy dosage of obligation we put on them, we give them if we're near they're elected, we say, Mr. O'Doherty is your counsel. Here's his number, here's his email. If you have any problem, talk to him. He will be available for you all the time. If he isn't, there'll be an automatic transfer to somebody else. But basically, he will guide you through and this is used constantly. Members of parliament constantly phone up and say, I don't want to get in trouble. Can I do this? Can I do that? Etc. etc. So it turned out to be very helpful for them. And you'd think it was only initially, and as the year goes on, it's an ongoing process year round. There's a dialogue, and we basically tell them how to manage their conflict of interest. And the members of Congress also, since they report to us and we put on a public registry the information we get from them, we're also under an obligation to investigate their fellow members if somebody reports us. If one MP writes to me and says, one other MP has done this, or some public servant has done, would you like you to investigate? We have two-step process. I look at first of all, say, is there something there? What are the relevant facts? And is there reason to believe there has to be a breach of the code? If yes, then I make a full investigation. And when I do make a full investigation, then I have the power of the judge. I can summon people, I can summon documents, and put them under oath, etc. And at the end of that, I issue a report of my findings. But as I just keep saying, the key on all of this is not to necessarily find the wrongdoing, to prevent it, to help people manage it so that it never arises. Now, the Conflict of Interest Act, as I told you before, it focuses on three types of people: ministers and their staff, reporting public office holders, which are senior members of the public service, and public office holders, which are part-time appointees. Again, each one of these reporting public office holders has an officer assigned to them whom they can talk to and deal with, etc. They also have this disclosure agreement. Upon appointment, you have to disclose all your assets, your family assets, etc., and whatever you report be in a redacted form be put on the website. We also look at it annually, and we try to make sure that, in effect, whatever these people do, who they deal with, who they interact with, is there for everybody to know. Now, the Conflict of Interest Act, strangely enough, only talks about conflict. It doesn't talk apparent or potential conflict. It's a big, big distinction. Members of the House of Commons have to do with dealing with apparent and real. Here, we only deal with real. And it's defined in the Act, and it's very narrow. The public officer is in a conflict of interest when he or she exercises an official power, duty, or function that provides an opportunity to further his or her private interests, those of his or her relatives or friends, or to properly further another person's private interest. Take that apart means, as a public officer, you can't do anything that benefits yourself. You can't do anything that benefits your family or your friends. And you can't use your powers to benefit somebody else. You may not be a friend, may not be a friend, but you used your powers to give him a benefit. You can't do that. So that's how it is, and that's the test we apply to determine whether there's a conflict of interest, and in this investigation whether any one of these provisions has been violated. It also has provisions for post-employment, that people who leave the government have a cooling off period. Ministers have cooling off periods, everybody else has a 1-year cooling off period. And that means that if anybody whom you've dealt with in a significant way during your tenure, you can't switch sides and then say, okay, I could buy here tomorrow and I sign on and start with you. No, you have to wait a year before you do that. And this is particularly important for most people, especially ministers. After all, your contacts, your network, that's your wealth, etc. And now you can't use it for two years. And there's a specific provision, unless there is a dispensation from me saying, yes, in this case, you can provide A, B, C, or else really, this is not so important. This has nothing to do with what you did before. You can. Post-employment, people come you get quite a few of these requests and saying, I want to do this and this per post-employment. Can I do that, etc. And the way the Act is structured, which is really that everything is discretionary on the commissioner. It's at most rules I can suspend partially or totally, depending on the circumstance or condition, etc., saying, yeah, you can take a job with that company, but there has to be a Chinese wall. You cannot talk about this. Or yes, you cannot, you can only do it. You don't have to do 2 years. That's too much. I think 1 year is more, especially if it's an intervening election. It becomes really irrelevant, etc. But these are absolute discretions that are vested in the commissioner. And the whole Act is really this cooling off period. As I say, I can reduce it. I do reduce it as much as possible. But again, in theory, anybody can appeal this and go to the federal court and say whatever ruling I made isn't proper. In practice, nobody ever does. Because it's an ethical decision which I've made using my judgment and experience. By the mere fact that you bring it to court and you raise it bigger their profile, so now becomes a big issue, etc. And obviously, all of these age issues are related. Let's face it, you can go one way or the other. But the last thing you want to do is have it publicized that you have an ethical problem and you differ with the ethics commissioner. It isn't worth it. So it's quite a large power, and we have to exercise it very cautiously and I'm trying to justify what can. And I've got to understand people have a life before and after the public service, and they're entitled to that. Just have to do it in such a way that it doesn't get into conflict with their work. Now, how do we encourage compliance? We can minimum penalty for reporting deadline. The big thing is that we register everything on the public, on our website. People can find out what are the facts regarding anybody who falls under the Act, and also that as a commissioner can make compliance order and say you must do ABC, so you have to file this or this, you have to discontinue this content, and that's a mandatory order and that's enforceable by court. And of course, I can also start investigations on request of other people or on my own. The overall legislative approach, in a nutshell, is that principles and rules are set out. Commissioner has a lot of discretion to allow deviation, to waive compliance, to start or terminate investigation. And the penalty, as I mentioned before, is exposure. I can ruin somebody's reputation. That's really the number one penalty. And Bob asked me, what's the overall approach that I give to people, especially newly elected MPs or so, and how to approach conflict of interest. And as I say, two things. Don't look at the specific wording. Look at the principle. What are we trying to do? We're trying to avoid conflict of interest. We're trying to ensure that your behavior is ethical and reflects the value of the general public. If anything is questionable, if you're in doubt, don't do it. Don't ever play defense having to defend what you're doing. If there's an action you're not sure, if you don't get clearance from me, don't do it. It is undoubtedly, it's going to be controversial, and once it becomes controversial, it becomes a problem for you and for me. And lastly is, do everything as much as you can in public. Avoid being hiding things, trying to do things, etc. The more you're transparent, the more it's obvious that you're compliant, and therefore there's any appearance of potential conflict of interest automatically wiped out. So that was a very quick and fast overview. I'd gladly answer any questions that you have. Bob promised he would give me a hard time.
Well, since my students vote, so one of the things that we discuss a lot in the class, can they hear me over there, Darcy? Okay, is kind of guiding values and principles, and we realize that a lot of this is contextual. But our students are new to North America. They may have had visits or knowledge before, and there may be some differences in terms of cultures from where they come from, and there may be some differences relative to legislative provisions in their own countries that they come from. So in terms of, if they're coming into Canada, what advice, you partially answered that question with what you put up on the screen, what advice would you give them in terms of making ethical decisions? So they've gone through an ethical decision-making process. It's part of the course, and then case studies are like that. But in terms of guiding general principles, not applying specifics, what would you advise them in their decision-making process based on your experience as a commissioner?
Well, I think my closing words will basically address that point. When you look at a situation, if you have doubts as to what something is ethical, try to get a resolution of it, or try to get the information from somebody who has the authority to rule on it. If you can't find that, then basically trust your own gut. If you are questioning it yourself, you know there is something wrong. There is something that can, or even if it isn't wrong, that can be misrepresented and can. Don't forget, we're not only talking about real conflict, but we're talking about something that can be represented as conflict. And people, especially if you're in an elected position or a senior government position, there's always somebody who tries to attack you one way or another, and you don't want to give them any ammunition for attack. I think that's the basics is there. And try to, as I say, be transparent. Try to make you. But a lot of people get into trouble because they make a decision, but they don't explain it and they don't publicize it. If you explain what you do and you give the rationale for it, then you are much better position. If you just, we did this and don't ask me why, it's my authority, I can do it and I made it. No, that doesn't work. People want to understand what led you to make whatever decision.
There's a classic case in Nova Scotia a few years ago with David Dingwall, who was in the position of head of the Canadian Mint, and they highly publicized his travel expenses and dinners and things like that. And his comment back, which is, probably a good example of what you're describing, was, "I'm entitled to my entitlements."
Yeah. Rhyming is not that. It was made everybody remember. I actually know David Dingwall very well personally. He was a minister, and it was just a stupid way to say it. If he had just said, "Look, I claim whatever I'm entitled to claim under," nobody would have picked it up. But using the specific wording that. And secondly, I think we're talking about chewing gum. Why on earth? Don't be stupid. 50 cents or $1.50, whatever it is. Don't claim it. You're just asking for fun. You know that as a minister, every single one of your expenses, like mine too, is published at the end of the month, right? So why put something like chewing gum on it? Can't you afford your chewing gum yourself? As I say, if something smells, don't even touch it. Yes. Oh, there's a red coat.
So in my company back home, my main job, because I was an admin and HR executive, I had to constantly cross-check NDAs and employment contracts where confidentiality was a huge part of it. And for us, like wording was very, very important. I think half my job was basically rereading every document, rereading every contract to make sure there's nothing that could potentially go wrong. So I remember you mentioning in your last slide that wording isn't that important, but in my company, a wrong misstep could potentially cause a lot of havoc. So for me, I had to make sure every word was correctly put in so that we're safeguarded from everything, just to make sure that in the future that there's no conflict of interest or there's no breach in anything. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted your opinion on that because I know you mentioned at the ending principle was more important than wording. But I feel like when you have a written document with a signature, how do you combat that?
Okay, let me explain my comment first of all. When you deal with something like taxes, wording is extremely important. If the wording is this, do I fall into this provision or not? Do I pay 10% or 15%? That's really very, and that's everything is literal. You either caught by the tax provisions or you aren't. And so therefore you structure your business or what your activities are so they take maximum advantage of the income tax. Here we're in a different universe. Here we're talking about principles. We're talking, you can't define ethics anymore as I gave you one at the beginning, which says our values, which are based on democracy, all of this wonderful concept, but very hard to define in detail. And so that what I was trying to say is when you come to an ethical decision, etc., you can look, as the example he gives here, I'm entitled to my entitlement. I am entitled to claim don't look at that. Look at the overall picture. Look at what are we doing ethically, and clearly we don't expect ministers to share to claim minute little things, etc. We expect them to have an idea of what they're there. They're there to elect to do the best for the country. We remunerate them well, but don't push it to the extreme of claiming everything and single point. That's what I was trying to do. And for my advisors too, like Stephanie here, who does it, I always tell them, first of all, look, where's the conflict? Is there conflict? Then look at what the actual provision is. So that's what I meant by saying keep the principle. Yes.
Thank you. I believe one of the institutions that fights against conflict of interest auditing department. Auditing department.
Yeah.
Audits. So you are talking about the auditing general.
Yes.
My first question, I want to find out if the AG, the auditing general is appointed by the government or is not. And the second question is, if they are appointed, then how do we justify that because they are appointed, they do not actually try to defend these government officials instead of justifying the truth behind all their actions? So thank you.
Darcy, can everybody hear those questions on the?
Mary Ellen over here, yeah.
Remember at the beginning, I talked about the various pillars in the government of Canada that ensure ethical behavior. All of these commissioners are appointed by the government with approval from Parliament. So what happens usually is the government makes a selection process, people apply, etc. They go, a committee goes through and picks this person. Then they talk to the various political parties in Parliament and say, we intend to appoint as Auditor General so and so, and get the feel for it, etc. And usually a person is of such renommee, there is no issue. But if there is some negative feedback, etc., they may reconsider the selection and then they put this, whoever they finally decide to want to appoint, they put it before Parliament, and Parliament votes. And usually it's nearly always unanimous because there's a lot of work done beforehand, so that you don't have exactly the situation that you suggest that the person appointed is seen as a defender of government. No, it has to be somebody who is neutral, as unblemished, who has no previous experience. And then the Auditor General, our present or our previous ones too, would love to hear your words because they're always being accused of the opposite, of trying to find fault in the government, of being picky, of exposing things and being too tough and too regimented, etc. And it's a fine line, but when you Auditor General, you audit, one thing is, has money been spent properly? But the second line is, did we get value for money? That's because it's quite a judgment call. And it's very difficult to make under certain circumstances. So the Auditor General's auditor or the lobbyist general or the other one, there's never been any question of the person being a government person or doing things pro-government. So no, they're seen as neutral because of the selection process and the approval by Parliament. Yes.
Talked about, it's interesting to know that there's an office code of ethics.
Yeah.
You talked about conflict of interest. I want to find out, is there a place for nepotism in the Canadian context? So I say this to make a point that as a leader, if you find yourself in a leadership position in an organization, you of course want to succeed. So if you have a wealth of experience, you've dealt with people in various sectors, and so if there's a project that needs to be done, and you feel, I think Mr. Williams can do the job, or Ms. Gladys can do the job. All things being equal, are public officials allowed to make suggestions and say that can we, in awarding contracts, can we get this person involved? Because you talked about the fact that you don't need to get friends, family members involved, but if they can do the job. So where I'm coming from, in the African context, you know, governments could be in power for so long, and if they've worked with some contractors for a long period of time, and they're comfortable with them, and the fact that they really want to succeed, this person, I've worked with them before, and they've been able to deliver. There's nothing wrong for me to still get them involved in running my country. Yes, so just like you have a code of ethics guiding lobbying, and I want you to stress on that as well. I want to understand what that is. I will read about it, but since you, and if there's a place, a code of ethics for nepotism, so that there can be some good out of it. There can be some good out of nepotism. So
Yeah. So,
Very sure. Can I add to that?
Good.
I want to add to a question for you to answer together, sir. Actually, from where we are coming from, I think the word lobbyist is not more pronounced over there. We are used to negotiator. Yeah, that is what we are used to most time. It is when we got here, we start hearing lobbyist. But in Africa, we always hear negotiator. So please, sir, while answering our question, I will also want you to try to differentiate the difference between the two words.
well, let's do the nepotism first. Nepotism usually means you favor somebody whom you're related. You give them a contract because you're a cousin or a friend or something like that, and he doesn't deserve it. The way we try to, you give it because he's not necessarily the best contractor, but he's related to you, so you do. That's why you give him the contract. That's what nepotism usually means. You favor somebody because of the connection, not because of what that person can do or would do. In order to get around that, what we do, we basically say, let's say your example, you're awarding a contract, and one of the applicants happens to be your nephew. He's a very competent man. He can do the job, but he happens to be your nephew. Under our rules, you will have to disclose it and disqualify yourself from the selection procedure, so that the people who selected exclude the person who has a potential nepotistic connection. So therefore, your nephew, in my example, may still get the contract, but you weren't involved in decision making. The decision making is made by a committee that excluded you. Or if you can't make it, you give it to a colleague whose head doesn't have that conflict. It's not perfect. Of course, you don't have to tell you, when you delegate something, you can delegate it, please do it this way. My nephew email is there, and that's why I'm going away. But he's a very good man, etc. So these things happen, But by and large, it works. We do, in effect, require people to take themselves out of it or put in a screen in the office saying that anything to do with that firm, I will not deal with it. Somebody else will have to deal with it, etc. Now, your point, you refresh me again. What did you want? Negotiation, lobbying. Yeah. What is lobbying? Basically, what lobbying is, the way we run is people come and represent their view to the government. They can do that. There may not be a immediate goal. There may not be a contract, but you want to influence policy or you want to assist, and that's your right. And you obviously publicly explain, put your position, but you also want to reach the ear of the decision maker. And you want to talk to him and explain it to him or her in detail. So therefore, you register as a lobbyist saying, yeah, I represent, for whatever it was, fracking or oil fracking in the industry. And obviously, who do I want to speak to? I want to speak to the Minister of Industry, the Minister of Energy, the Minister of this, etc. And fine. So on the record, that's who you are, and this is who you represent. And then when you phone them and they get an appointment, you report that I went there and for half an hour and we spoke about new technology or whatever. So all the world knows it. Also, the people who are against, in my example, fracking oil, can also go and say, "I want to speak to you, Minister. I mean, I want to put you the other side, etc." So, but it's in effect an open dialogue. We don't know the details, etc., but at least to the extent that we see everybody sees who is trying to influence that decision maker of their point of views. And that's basically all with the lobbyist reputation. So there are no undercover contracts or any contracts. No. And the minister will also, or the decision maker will feel much better. Here is a list of all the people I spoke to. I have widely consulted, right? These are all lobbyists. And here's my decision now after all of this consultation. So there is no negotiation, etc. It is in order to make sure that the people hear from all sides, not only from one side. And the lobbyist registry is always being looked at by everybody to see who else is trying to influence them if there's a specific issue, whatever it is. There are usually 2 or 3 sides so that you can see who has talked to whom.
To go back to Gladys's question, I think I interpreted even beyond what we're talking about. I suspect, having been in the government for 26 years, suspect it's more common than people would believe, where you have someone that you've customarily dealt with who's done all your information technology work, has done all of your road work, has done all of this and all of that, and you're comfortable with it. You don't want to take the time to waste 6 months going out and doing it. You're happy with it, but you're not opening up bid process, which consultants or engineers, whatever, might be unhappy about, that all that work seems to be going in one area.
Yeah, but that's you deal with this by having rules regarding contracting. You have to have open bids when it's more than 25,000. They just automatically.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. And there's exceptions for one-time renewal or something like that. But essentially, you cannot just always go to the same person, except for small stuff here. It's just that why bother having open competitions when it's $20,000 or something like that. So to that extent, basically, where we say on the small stuff, you exercise your judgment, you go away to the people who, if there are people who had a good experience, by all means, but on the big ones, you have to have an open competition.
The question online. Can councillors lobby amongst each other?
And councillors,
Can councillors lobby amongst each other?
what councillors are we talking about? Are you mean commissioners?
If you can elaborate.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. I understand one of the unethical way of a leader that can see as unethical is somebody who actually deals with impunity.
Yeah.
And they're also talking about conflict of interest, which in other way matches or goes together. So I wanted to find out if there is a way or mechanism or there's an institution that deals with impunity.
I don't know. I'm not quite sure I get what you mean by impunity.
When we talk about impunity, is that when somebody that supports wrongdoing, somebody is doing wrong thing, but you tend to defend the person instead of, letting the person please the law. And I'm asking if, let's say, government official is instead of being holding with accountability, but the government trying to defend the person. I'm talking this from experience back from my country. We could see some MPs or because some MPs or ministers who are found guilty in some one way or the other. But instead of the government to let these people face the law, the government tend to defend these officials. And I'm asking that do we have any institution or do we have any group or mechanism that even if the government tend to defend these government officials, let's say the appointees, we still have that the system also have a way of, letting these people facing the law.
I don't know quite how to answer this. Impunity in Canada, if you are doing something that breaches the law or breaches the regulation, etc., there's a procedure to prosecute you and to deal with it. Now, not all cases get prosecuted. Very often, it says there's lack of evidence, not enough credible evidence, etc. Or that's what we call prosecutorial discretion. We don't. It isn't in the national interest to prosecute us for this and this reason. But that's very carefully exercised. But essentially, it is the exception to the rule, and very few cases that doesn't apply. Normally, we have a process that deals with any country, and to give somebody impunity, as you call it, from the consequences of his actions, whatever they be. I don't believe we have any provisions that we just have provisions that the enforcer has discretion to decide no, for whatever, for very legitimate reason, he or she that decides not to enforce that provision. I don't know whether I answered your question.
Yes,
okay. You can refer that to the RCMP though if it came to your attention.
That's totally. But anything that's criminal, I have to refer to the RCMP. Same thing as the Commission of Public Integrity or the Commission of Lobbyists. If they run cross criminal activity against those to the RCMP. Now again, the RCMP investigates and then they refer to the Director of Public Prosecution, and he or she decides whether to prosecute it or not, and goes through with this thing that I just described. Is the evidence enough? If there is evidence, does this warrant it? Etc. Are there other reasons why we shouldn't be trying?
Just to clarify the previous question, can municipal councils lobby on a certain subject?
Yeah, absolutely. And municipal councillors can be register themselves as lobbyists, but it's the same as any other Canadian citizen, and probably do, and depending who they want to lobby. I have no idea, but there's no prohibition on that, no limitation.
Right. So one of the things you mentioned is that for your area that there isn't much of a, I guess, resource limit. You said, and one of the things you said was that if you need more resources, then it's fairly easy because there's a limit regarding your resources. And while you mentioned transparency is one way to keep practices in check, wouldn't the fact that there is no limit on your ability to get additional resources, wouldn't that create, I guess, an ethical potential for misuse, I guess?
I think you misunderstood me. What I said, I didn't say there's no limit. It is easy to obtain because it is something that's valuable. It is totally transparent. I write to the Speaker of the House and say, I'm for running my office. I need 45 million or whatever it is. He will then approve it and it gets put into the government account as an expenditure. If I said instead of 45 last year, this year I want 65, then I have to justify in my request why I do it. all I said, it usually gets approved because you do not want to be seen as restricting ethics, you know. On the other hand, we try to be as responsible as possible. And our budget from year to year goes up 1 or 2%. So, because exactly, you have to live by what we preach, you're quite right. Yeah.
So, being in your office, have you ever faced any conflict of interest? If, like, there was a matter that came to you and you had a conflict of interest, then where would that go to?
It's a good question. Fortunately, I haven't had to face it, but I would presumably then say, I authorize the lobbyist commissioners to do it because it involves my son, let's say, you know, no, I obviously can't do it. I don't even want to see it, you know. My office, people of staff would immediately say, hey, we have something involves your son, what should I do with it? And I say, take it over there. I don't want to know what it is. I have nothing to do with it. And she has the full power to do exactly what I could do.
How do you keep away the biasness? If there is a matter and you might be biased to that, and how do you keep away from yourself, or how do you not bias to that thing?
Bias?
Bias, yes, like there is a matter of an MP and he did something wrong, and you are biased to that MP, or you have some soft spot for that MP or that person. So,
well, fortunately, in my career, I've always been in government, so and I was a judge, so I'm used to dealing with bias, etc. So I try to approach everything neutral and informative. If there is something that I feel very strongly about it, I will do exactly what you said before. I would say, look, this actually goes against my personal beliefs, whatever they happen to be. So I don't want to deal with this. You know, let's give it to somebody who doesn't feel that strongly. It has never happened, but if it did, that's what I would do. Yes.
Sorry, I have to bring it back to the topic lobbying. In your opinion, what's the difference between politics, plain politics, and lobbying? So in this case, in an organization.
The reason why there's nothing wrong with lobbying per se, and it's a perfectly legitimate activity and try to influence decision makers. The reason why we have a lobbying registration and a code is because you want it to be in law. You want people know who talks to whom, etc. You don't want to have people going through the back door and getting policy changes, etc., without anybody knowing about it or having had a chance to input and saying, hey, before you do that change, you realize that it includes this, has this side effect or influences this group, which you have not thought about it. We didn't have lobby in the regime. People would first obviously make their views in public, but they would also try to reach decision makers privately, secretly, etc., to advance to influence their mind and advance political points without anybody knowing about it. And then once it becomes a government policy, it's very difficult to change, etc. And we want to make sure that the government decisions are made with the full knowledge and input from all interested parties. We didn't have lobbyists. What would happen would prevent rich people, influential people, inviting the minister or to lavish parties at their house, etc., and use that occasion to discuss things with them, etc. That's the sort of thing you want to avoid. People they feel indebted. I've been there several times. It has been etc. Now he wants a small change here, etc. Well, let's look at it, etc. It's a whole wrong relationship. Well, if it's all officially, you go there, this is what I represent, that's what I want. And by the way, I disclose it. That's fine. Other people can come and disclose a different point of view. That's what you're trying to achieve. You should invite the Commissioner of Lobbying. I think she can answer these questions, but better than me. She'd be probably very interested in some of you. Yes.
I would like to know, executing your mandates, is any challenges, be internal, external, or in yeah, how you solve these challenges, how you go challenges like this as a commissioner?
Sorry, I didn't hear. I guess I didn't catch the question.
I'm asking if, as a commissioner, you face any challenges.
Yeah.
And how you find solutions to these challenges.
I think two challenges. You always want to make sure you find the best people to do your job, etc. And you know, working for the federal government is not that attractive to some people, and felt very adventurous people would like to have a bigger challenge, etc. And or else, if the remuneration in government is not really that great. You know, you get a good pension, but you're not going to become rich. So getting the right people, and don't forget, everybody has to be bilingual, has to be properly trained, and everything. So and you're competing with the whole public service, you know. So finding the right people for small department is difficult because they're ambitious. They want to go further. The abilities for advancement are not that great. The other one is you always wrestle with the issue of. I read you the conflict of interest definition. It is very clear, etc. But when you make the decision, it's always in a question of the appearance of a potential or apparent conflict of interest. You can't rule on it. You can only rule on it exactly, but you have to have in the back of your mind how is this going to play out in public, you know, how is it going to look on the front page of the Globe and Mail. So trying to fix the big issue is always deal with the exact conflict, but keep in mind there is this appearance that, you know, don't be swayed by the appearance, but you can't ignore it either. I struggle a lot with that issue, you know. It would be much easier if the act actually did deal with the appearance of potential conflict. But a lot of things you look at and don't like the smells, etc. But you can't point your finger to an actual conflict of interest. Yet you know once you say, okay, you can go ahead, you may get crucified in the press. How could you ever perform this?
And address the cross-border conflict interest issues. Like the global company, they have the branch or factory around the world. So the guidance effective in the Canada the area or.
Well, I think you have no choice, but obviously you have to comply with whatever the local regime is on both sides. And they're not quite, they can be quite different. And they also can, ethically, if you're talking about democratic countries, usually they're relatively same. If some of the countries are non-democratic, it becomes a totally different issue. And I think all you can do is make sure that you have in each country you comply with the laws or the ethical standards as they apply, and make sure to the extent that they go across borders that they're acceptable on the other side. It is not easy. I see a dilemma, but I don't think there's an answer to it. I don't know.
Yeah, the probation conflict, is it a part of the conflict interest guidance, or is it a different like the ASIL compliance? So let's say in a pharmaceutical industry and a quality apartment, the head cannot be the head of the production team because they are like the duty shouldn't be
managed by the same person or the person who have the interest conflict.
I mean, okay, I see where you're driving at it. Those are really internal company provisions that they don't necessarily have. You're talking intra-company ethics, right? And whether the person who's in sales and the person in quality control can same person be involved, etc. Because quality would suffer possibly suffer at the expense of sales. I understand the issue, but I don't know. I would imagine you will set up your own internal company in such a way to make sure that you do not in any way can be run afoul of the most legal and ethical requirements of the pharmaceutical regulator. I mean, in most industries, in most activities, there is a code of conduct that you're supposed to apply with. I'm sure there is one for pharmaceutical industries, and that would have to be your guidepost. Yes.
Well, the definition of ethics is basically universal, right? And you mentioned at the beginning of your speech that the foundation should be taken into consideration when you make a decision. Not only, let's say, a more broader view instead of a specific detail.
Yeah.
You got to come from that, right? And we spoke before about cultural influence in points of views, decisions, and etc. But my question for you is, what is the influence of religion in ethics? And does the government take any consideration in different religious backgrounds when they make some decisions that affects the whole population?
Well, as I mentioned before, I talked about values. I'm very careful not to talk about morals or religion or something. It is what the values are of this. They are, of course, a lot of the values come from religion, have a religious base. The government, Europe, I think, with very few exceptions, tries to make rules. They're not based on religion, don't take it into account. But you do have these exceptions. You have exceptions that certain things, if you are of a religion and this rule violates the basic tenet of religion, you can be exempted for it, but you're exempted at a price. I mean, give you a perfect example. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in blood transfusions. So therefore, if you're an adult and you're sick in a hospital, etc., the doctor says the only way I can save you is a blood transfusion. You say, no, I won't have one. The doctor can actually let you die. Okay, he doesn't have to do these now. However, your child has to do something. It is because you, I forgot what the date is, about the ages or something. But the idea is, yes, it's against you. This is our rules. We save people who say you don't want to be saved. We let you. But the decision is only for you. It's not for minors. You know, I forgot it. I don't know the exact one. Maybe I've taken the wrong example, but the whole idea is you understand what it is. They try to do a minimal respect or exception for something that is religiously based. But other than that, it is really values. And we do try to keep religion out of it as possible because different people have different views.
I'm from Chile.
Yeah.
Very interesting your presentation. I was thinking a little bit about what is going on in the country, and in the last 30 years, I think so, we truly believe was a great country with the highest standard in the union. And during the last 5 years, I think the politics and all these ethical dilemmas was more frequently and was finding a lot of issues related with laws and some creativity activities. And we have a code of ethics. We have a very strong law regulations. You have to register every single meeting with anyone from the government or parliament or the mayor or whatever. You have to register, and there is a transparency regulation very strong, so I can ask any information in any website. There is a deadline, and the authority receive a penalty if they don't follow that deadline. But still, with all this system, which is really great, we have today a lot of ethical issues every single way, and the politics was the quality of the politics was going down. And if you think about it, maybe 5 years ago nobody think about it, and nobody expect that level of the situation will be in a country like Chile, but we are in there now. So my question is, how dynamic is your the system here in order to be prepared and be too flexible in order for the future, for this new situation, especially with the social media and with the AI, which is going on very, very fast at the regulations in each country, right?
Interesting, you come from Chile. I went to school in Valparaiso.
Really?
Yeah.
I see.
Right. So I know a little bit about Chile, so I understand the other problem. You put your finger on the one thing. This whole ethical system is being challenged all over the place, and social media has a lot to do with it. To be effective, there's so many different viewpoints can be expressed, and unfortunately, people don't generally look at the whole thing, but just live in their own echo chamber, and they only listen to views that reflect their own prejudice or their own point of views. And it's our system. We keep amending it, we keep adding to it, etc., because the stresses are there. No question about it. So far, our system has proved relatively resilient. We have had a few scandals and a few cases of corruption, but nothing of a major dimension. But by the same token, you always be behind the social media and all these technology develop faster than you can think about what the possible abuses are and what you can do against it. And so I'm not so sure our system is flexible enough, and we do enough, etc. And we may very well find that notwithstanding this elaborate system that we set up, and which is very expensive, like you mentioned in Chile, it still doesn't work. So a lot of it really depends also on the willingness of people to look at it, saying, this is your system, these are the rules, and you try to make it so it's not worse being in non-compliance. But that's a poor way of enforcing it. The best way is that people positively say, yeah, I want an honest government, so therefore I can't do this, so I can't do that. Sorry, you asked a broad question, I don't have an answer, because I think it's just an overall development. I hope we won't get into a situation where we have less compliance with our ethics than we have right now.
So my question is, does it from your response to Illy's question, where you mentioned that the example of the Jehovah's Witness in case of blood transfusion for a child versus the adult. I come from Trinidad and Tobago, and where we So my issue there is that in Canada and North America, there's a lot of focus on children and just for that same example, if as an adult, as a parent of a child, because of my beliefs and my values, which is like you said, ethics is equated to your values. If I believe that this specific care for my child is the best based on my values, when decisions such as, for my religious beliefs or whatever my beliefs are, that I make a decision regarding my child by doctors or the government being saying that it would not apply to your child, and a doctor could, without punishment, I guess, perform this blood transfusion. So, in order for, on this child compared to the adult, doesn't that say that the government or whatever organization then values their own versions of ethics about an individual's vision, and doesn't that create an ethical issue?
I think, this conflict between religion and law is as old as as North America. You remember it was the original Puritans came because they wanted to practice the law and the religion they couldn't practice at home. Felix Frank was a very famous judge of the U.S. Supreme Court. I think said it in one sentence: freedom of religion by reason of law, but no freedom from law by religious dogmatism. That's the principle. It's easy to understand, and applying it is hell of a difficult. What is religious dogmatism? And when is it religious? It is really not. But that's a simple. That is a principle all courts practice, and try to apply. And I may have used a poor example, but there are cases where, in effect, the law will make exceptions because of religious belief. But as overall, religious dogmatism does not free you from law. The law makes sure you can practice your law. When the two come into conflict, you have to make these very difficult value judgments.
Conscious of the time, maybe one or some other questions.
Really establish the company for the start of the currently more don't have the complex structure and the business. So for this company, how could the founder and the management could build the strong infrastructure to regarding ethical actions and to avoid the conflict interest in the future? What can they do?
I think it can only speak for Canada. Most companies nowadays have a compliance officer. We have a whole compliance section. And the compliance section really makes sure that all the activities of the company are in accordance with the laws and regulations applying to whatever it happens. And to send that officer usually also administers the company's own code of ethics and values, or code, whatever they call it. It's code of good behavior, code of corporate behavior, whatever. Every good company of any size has one of those. And the compliance officer is usually charged with that, looking at it too, and then making the key to judgments, or else referring up the ladder. That's, I think, the most efficient way of doing it, that you have the same person who has to comply with the legal requirements, also requires with the ethical requirements that the company imposes on itself.
One last question, Manuel, did you have your hand up?
Yes. Okay, so I wanted to ask, in the legal department, is it allowed for the judge to sit in a case that concerns a family or a relative?
No, he'd have to recuse himself. Then, I was a judge for 5 years, a federal court judge. I couldn't possibly hear a case that in any way involved a family or friend. You as a judge, as a self-protection, you do that here. When you come and you see the case and you see something in there, or something, you go to your chief justice and say, I'd assign it to somebody else, I'm recusing myself because I don't want to be accused of conflict of interest.
And one last question from the pseudo host here. What is the most common set of issues that come before your, we talked about this earlier in another conversation, I think, it comes before your house.
One is post-retirement. What can you do and what can't you do with it? So there's lots of it, especially nowadays. The government is about to change. A lot of people are looking for the future. The other one is gifts. Gifts. So again, we have specific rules. You can up to this limit you can accept. Above it, you have to refuse. You have to return or give it to charity. And then there's this category of gifts of courtesy or convention, etc. They are always, you have to disclose them, and how large are they? When you keep them or not? You don't want to offend the person who's given it to you, etc. And so most, especially MPs, I've had this delegation from Vietnam coming and giving me this ivory cup, and can I keep it or not, etc. and so on. You don't know what the value is. It doesn't come as a price tag attached. So we got a lot of those questions. And I think our counselors were very well at handling them. But those are the two most frequent issues.
Travel and gifts.
Yeah.
I want to thank Commissioner Finkenstein for getting going on.